Hey there, fellow gardeners and plant lovers. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your friendly corner of the internet where we talk about all things gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces both inside your home and out in your yard. Today we're diving into something really special, something that honestly changed the way I think about gardening efficiency. We're talking about a plant that you only need to plant once, and then it just keeps giving and giving, year after year. I know what you're thinking. Sounds too good to be true, right? But stick with me here because by the end of this conversation, you'll understand why this incredible plant isn't growing in every single garden yet, and more importantly, why it absolutely should be growing in yours. Let me start by painting a picture for you. Imagine waking up on a Saturday morning, grabbing your coffee, and heading out to your garden. Instead of facing rows of empty soil that need replanting, instead of worrying about whether you remembered to buy seeds this season, you walk over to a thriving patch of green that's been there for years. You harvest what you need, the plant keeps growing, and next week you'll be back doing the same thing. No replanting, no reseeding, no starting from scratch every single spring. This isn't some fantasy. This is the reality of growing perennial vegetables, and specifically we're talking about asparagus today. Now I can already hear some of you saying, asparagus? Really? That's your big reveal? But hear me out, because there's so much more to this story than you might think, and the reasons people aren't planting it are actually pretty interesting when you dig into them. Asparagus is genuinely one of those miraculous plants that just keeps on giving. Once you establish a healthy asparagus bed, it can produce delicious spears for 15 to 20 years, sometimes even longer if you treat it right. Think about that for a second. One afternoon of work planting crowns or seeds and you've got 2 decades of harvests ahead of you. Compare that to tomatoes, peppers, beans, or pretty much any annual vegetable that requires you to start fresh every single year. The time saved, the money saved, the effort saved. It all adds up in ways that honestly surprised me when I first made the switch to including more perennials in my garden. But here's where it gets interesting and where we start to understand why not everyone has jumped on this bandwagon yet. Asparagus demands patience, real, genuine patience. And in our instant gratification world, that's asking a lot from gardeners who want to see results quickly. When you plant asparagus crowns, which are basically the root systems of young asparagus plants, you're making an investment in the future. The first year, you don't harvest anything, not a single spear. You let those little shoots grow into tall, ferny foliage so the plant can build up its energy reserves underground. The second year, you might get a light harvest, maybe picking for a week or 2, but you still need to restrain yourself and let most of those spears mature into ferns again. It's only in the third year that you finally get a full harvest season, typically lasting 6 to 8 weeks in spring. For a lot of gardeners, especially those who are new to growing their own food, waiting 2 to 3 years for a payoff feels like an eternity. They want to see results this summer, not summers down the road. I totally get that mindset. I used to be the same way. But once you experience that first proper asparagus harvest from your own bed, once you taste those tender spears that you literally just snapped off minutes before cooking them, your perspective shifts entirely. Let me tell you about Daisy, a gardener I met at a local plant swap a few years back. She'd been growing vegetables for about 5 years and had tried pretty much everything. Tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, beans, you name it. She loved gardening but was starting to feel burned out by the constant cycle of planting, maintaining and replanting every single season. When I mentioned asparagus to her, she was skeptical. "I don't even know if I'll be in this house in 3 years," she said, which is actually a concern that holds a lot of people back. But here's what I told her, and here's what I'm telling you now. Even if you move, you're leaving behind something valuable for the next homeowner. And in the meantime, you're creating a legacy in your garden. Daisy decided to take the plunge and planted 20 asparagus crowns in a sunny corner of her yard. That first year, watching those ferny plants grow tall without harvesting anything was tough for her. She'd walk by that bed and feel like she was wasting space that could be growing zucchini or peppers. But she stuck with it, and by year 3 she was harvesting beautiful, thick asparagus spears every other day throughout April and May. When I ran into her last spring, she couldn't stop talking about how much she loved having that reliable, low-maintenance patch in her garden. The asparagus just does its thing year after year, and all she has to do is add some compost in fall and maybe pull a few weeds. That's it. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now let's talk about why asparagus is such a perfect plant for the plant once harvest forever category. The key is in how asparagus grows. Those spears that we eat are actually the young shoots of the plant emerging from an underground crown system. The crown is this gnarly, octopus-looking mass of roots that stores all the plant's energy. Each spring, when soil temperatures start warming up, the crown sends up shoots. If you harvest those shoots while they're still tender, the crown just keeps sending up more throughout the harvest season. Eventually, you stop harvesting and let some shoots grow into their full ferny glory, which allows the plant to photosynthesize and build up energy reserves for next year. It's a beautiful, self-sustaining cycle. The crown gets stronger and more productive as it ages, which means your harvest actually improve over time rather than declining. How many vegetables can you say that about? Another reason asparagus fits this magical category so well is its hardiness. This plant is tough. It can handle freezing winters. In fact, it needs a cold period to go dormant and reset for the next growing season. It's not fussy about soil types as long as you provide decent drainage and don't plant it in heavy clay that stays waterlogged. Pests generally leave it alone. Diseases can occasionally show up, but they're not common if you've chosen a good site and aren't overcrowding your plants. Compare this to the constant battle many gardeners face with tomato hornworms, cucumber beetles, squash borers, and all the other insects that seem to specifically target annual vegetables. Asparagus just quietly does its thing in the corner of your garden, asking for very little attention and giving back abundantly year after year. The return on investment is absolutely incredible when you factor in both time and money. Speaking of money, let's break down the economics here because this is another area where asparagus really shines. At the grocery store, fresh asparagus can be pretty expensive, especially if you're buying the thick, tender spears that everyone loves. Depending on where you live and the season, you might be paying anywhere from $4 to $8 per pound, sometimes more for organic. A 20-crown asparagus planting, which costs maybe $30 to $50 initially, can produce around 10 to 20 pounds of asparagus per year once it's fully established. Some well-maintained beds produce even more. Do the math on that over 10 years and you're looking at hundreds of pounds of asparagus that you would have otherwise bought at premium prices. The initial investment pays for itself many times over, and that's not even counting the superior quality and freshness you get from homegrown spears. There's also something deeply satisfying about walking out to your garden, harvesting asparagus, and having it on your dinner table within 20 minutes. That kind of freshness simply can't be bought. But let's address the elephant in the room. If asparagus is so great, why isn't everyone growing it? We've touched on the patience factor, which is huge, but there are other reasons too. Space is a legitimate concern for many gardeners. Asparagus needs room to spread out. Each crown should be planted about 18 inches apart, and the rows should be at least 4 feet apart if you're doing multiple rows. For a decent-sized bed that'll feed a family, you're looking at a commitment of around 100 square feet or more. In small urban gardens where every square foot is precious, dedicating that much space to a crop you can't fully harvest for a couple years is a tough sell. I totally understand that perspective. If you've only got a tiny raised bed or a small balcony garden, asparagus might not be your best choice. But if you've got even a modest-sized yard with a sunny spot that's just growing grass, converting part of that into an asparagus bed is honestly one of the best long-term decisions you can make. Another barrier is knowledge and confidence. A lot of gardeners, especially newer ones, don't really understand how to plant asparagus or what it needs to thrive. They've heard it's complicated or finicky, and they shy away from trying. The truth is, asparagus isn't complicated at all. It's actually quite forgiving once you understand the basics. But there is a specific process for planting crowns that differs from just poking seeds in the ground. And if you've never done it before, it can feel intimidating. Let me walk you through the basics so you can see it's really not that scary. First, you need to prepare your bed properly. This is crucial because this bed is going to be in place for decades, so you want to get it right from the start. Choose a spot that gets full sun. Asparagus loves sun and produces best with at least 6 to 8 hours of direct light daily. Work the soil deeply, at least 12 inches down, and mix in plenty of compost or well-rotted manure. Asparagus appreciates fertile, loose soil that drains well. Next, you'll dig a trench about 8 inches deep and around 12 inches wide. This is where some people get nervous, but it's really straightforward. Place your asparagus crowns in the trench, spacing them about 18 inches apart. The crowns should sit on a little mound of soil with the roots spreading out around it, kind of like an octopus sitting on a hilltop. Then you cover them with just 2 to 3 inches of soil initially. As the spears start growing and emerging, you gradually add more soil over the course of several weeks until the trench is filled level with the surrounding ground. This gradual filling helps the plants establish strong root systems. Water them well, add a layer of mulch to suppress weeds and retain moisture, and then you wait. That first year, as I mentioned, you just let everything grow. Keep the bed weeded, make sure it gets water during dry spells, and watch those ferny plants develop. It's actually quite beautiful. Asparagus foliage is light and airy, almost ornamental in appearance. By understanding this process, you realize there's nothing mysterious or overly complicated about growing asparagus. It's different from planting tomatoes or lettuce, sure, but it's not difficult. The real challenge is mental, committing to something that won't pay off immediately. We're so conditioned to want fast results that this kind of long-term thinking feels foreign. But here's something I've learned from years of gardening. The most rewarding projects are often the ones that require patience and planning. There's something profoundly satisfying about creating systems in your garden that outlast a single season, that become part of the landscape and just keep producing. Asparagus teaches you to think in longer time frames, to plan not just for this summer, but for summers a decade from now. That shift in perspective is valuable beyond just the vegetable harvest. It changes how you approach gardening as a whole. Let me share another quick story that really illustrates this point. I know a guy named Oliver who's been gardening his entire life. He's in his 70s now, and he planted his asparagus bed when he was in his early 50s. That bed is still producing beautifully today, more than 20 years later. Every spring, Oliver harvests asparagus and shares it with neighbors, friends, and family. He often jokes that his asparagus bed is his legacy. Long after he's gone, that bed will still be there, still producing, still feeding people. There's something poetic about that, something that connects us to the land and to the future in a way that annual vegetables just can't quite match. When you plant asparagus, you're not just growing food for yourself right now, you're creating something lasting. You're making a statement that you believe in the future of that space and your connection to it. Now, asparagus isn't the only perennial vegetable out there, though it's definitely one of the most popular and productive. There are others worth mentioning that fit this plant once, harvest forever category, and understanding the broader world of perennial vegetables can really enhance your garden's productivity and reduce your overall workload. Rhubarb is another classic example. Plant a rhubarb crown and you'll be harvesting tart stalks for pies and jams for decades. Like asparagus, rhubarb needs patience. You shouldn't harvest much the first year and only lightly the second year, but once established, it's incredibly productive and virtually maintenance-free. The large, lush leaves are actually toxic, so you only harvest the stalks, but the plant itself is gorgeous and takes up less space than asparagus while still providing abundant harvests. Perennial onions are another great option, and they're perfect for people who don't have a ton of space. Walking onions, Egyptian onions, potato onions. These are varieties that produce clusters of bulbs both underground and sometimes even at the top of their stalks. You harvest some of the bulbs, leave some in the ground, and they multiply on their own. Year after year, you've got fresh onions without replanting. They're mild-flavoured, incredibly productive, and add a unique element to your garden. Artichokes are perennials in warmer climates, coming back year after year and producing those incredible flower buds that we love to eat. Even in colder areas, they can be grown as perennials with some winter protection. And then there are things like sorrel, a tangy lemony green that comes back every spring and provides fresh leaves for salads and soups throughout the growing season. Horseradish is another perennial. Plant one root and you'll have more horseradish than you know what to do with as it spreads and multiplies. The common thread with all these plants is that they reward you for thinking beyond the single season. They ask you to invest time and effort up front, to plan for the long term, and to trust in the process. In return, they give you years or even decades of harvests with minimal ongoing work. This is the essence of permaculture thinking, creating systems that are productive, sustainable, and low maintenance over time. Instead of fighting against nature every season, starting from scratch and battling weeds and pests, you work with natural cycles and let plants establish themselves as permanent fixtures in your garden ecosystem. It's a different mindset, but once you embrace it, it's incredibly liberating. Back to asparagus specifically, because there are some practical considerations that are worth discussing in detail. One question I get asked a lot is about varieties. There are quite a few asparagus varieties available, and choosing the right one for your climate and preferences can make a real difference. Traditional varieties like Martha Washington and Mary Washington have been around for decades and are incredibly reliable. They're what most people think of when they imagine asparagus, green spears with purple-tinged tips. Then there are newer hybrid varieties like Jersey Giant and Jersey Knight, which were bred specifically for disease resistance and high productivity. These Jersey hybrids are all male varieties, meaning they don't produce seeds and berries, which means all the plant's energy goes into producing spears rather than reproduction. This results in significantly higher yields, sometimes 50% more than traditional varieties. For most home gardeners, these Jersey hybrids are probably your best bet. There's also purple asparagus, which is not just a novelty, it actually has some practical advantages. Purple varieties like Purple Passion are sweeter and more tender than green asparagus, and they contain higher levels of antioxidants. The purple colour is striking and fun if you're growing for visual interest as well as eating. The one downside is that the purple colour tends to fade when you cook it, turning more greenish, but the flavour remains distinctly sweeter. White asparagus is another option, though it's more about cultivation method than variety. You create white asparagus by mounding soil over the emerging spears to block light, which prevents chlorophyll development. It's more labour-intensive and honestly more of a curiosity than a practical choice for most home gardeners, but it's an option if you want to experiment. Climate is another factor in variety selection. Some varieties are better suited to colder climates with long winters, while others perform better in milder areas. If you live in a region with very cold winters, you want a variety bred for hardiness. If you're in a warmer climate where winters are mild, you need a variety that doesn't require as long a cold period. Most seed companies and nurseries will indicate which varieties work best in different zones, so do a little research for your specific area. The good news is that asparagus as a species is adaptable and grows successfully in a huge range of climates, from Canada down through most of the United States and into warmer regions. It's one of those plants that really can thrive almost anywhere as long as you choose an appropriate variety and give it the conditions it needs. Let's talk about the actual harvest, because this is where all that waiting pays off. When your asparagus bed finally reaches full production in year 3, you're in for a treat. In early spring, as soil temperatures warm up, you'll start seeing spears poking through the mulch. They grow quickly, sometimes several inches in a single day, so you need to check your bed regularly. The key to great asparagus is harvesting at the right stage. You want spears that are around 6 to 10 inches tall with tight, compact tips. If the tips start to open up and look feathery, the spear is past its prime and will be tough and woody. To harvest, either snap the spear off at ground level with your hands or use a sharp knife to cut it just below the soil surface. I prefer snapping because it naturally breaks at the point where the tender part ends and the tough part begins, ensuring you're only getting the good stuff. During peak season, you might be harvesting every day or every other day. It's one of those wonderful problems to have, figuring out what to do with all your fresh asparagus. You can eat it fresh in countless ways, roasted with olive oil and garlic, grilled, sautéed, steamed, added to pasta, incorporated into omelettes, or simply blanched and served with butter. Asparagus is also excellent for preserving. You can pickle it, freeze it for later use, or even dry it, though freezing is probably the most practical method for most people. Blanch the spears in boiling water for 2 to 3 minutes. Shock them in ice water, drain and freeze in airtight bags. They'll keep for months and still taste great when you thaw and cook them in the depths of winter. The harvest season typically lasts 6 to 8 weeks, depending on your climate and how well established your bed is. After that, you stop harvesting and let all the new spears grow into full ferns. This is crucial for the long-term health of your bed. Those ferns photosynthesize throughout the summer and fall, building up energy in the crown for next year's harvest. A lot of first-time asparagus growers make the mistake of continuing to harvest too long, which weakens the plants and reduces future yields. Be disciplined about ending your harvest when you should, even if spears are still coming up. Your future self will thank you when you have bigger, better harvests in subsequent years. Maintenance through the growing season is minimal. Keep the bed weeded, especially in the first couple years when the plants are getting established. Once the ferny foliage fills in, it shades out most weeds naturally. Water during dry spells, though established asparagus is fairly drought-tolerant. In fall, after the foliage turns yellow and dies back, cut it down to ground level. Some people leave it standing through winter, but I prefer to cut it because it can harbour pests and diseases. Add a few inches of compost over the bed each fall, which feeds the soil and adds organic matter. That's honestly about it for maintenance. Way less work than any annual vegetable bed requires. Every few years, you might want to divide and rejuvenate your bed if it's getting overcrowded or if you want to expand. This is typically done in early spring before spears start emerging. Dig up crowns, divide them into sections, and replant in new locations or share with friends. It's amazing how easy it is to expand your asparagus production once you've got an established bed. One of my neighbours started with 10 crowns about 8 years ago, and she's now got 3 separate beds totaling nearly 60 plants, all divided from those original 10. She gives away asparagus crowns every spring to friends and family, spreading the asparagus love around the neighbourhood. One thing that surprises people is how ornamental asparagus can be. That ferny foliage is actually really attractive, swaying gently in the breeze and creating a soft, textured backdrop in your garden. Female plants, if you're growing non-hybrid varieties, produce red berries in late summer that add a pop of colour. Some gardeners incorporate asparagus into perennial flower borders or use it as a hedge or screen because of its attractive foliage. You don't have to relegate it to the vegetable garden. It can be a multifunctional part of your overall landscape design. This is another advantage of perennial vegetables generally. They can blur the line between food production and ornamental gardening, creating spaces that are both beautiful and productive. Let's address some common concerns and mistakes, because understanding what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. One big mistake is planting asparagus in poorly drained soil. Asparagus crowns will rot if they sit in waterlogged conditions. If your soil is heavy clay or tends to stay wet, you either need to amend it heavily with compost and sand to improve drainage or plant in raised beds. Another mistake is planting crowns too deep. 8 inches below the surface is plenty. Any deeper and the spears struggle to reach the surface, resulting in weak growth. Conversely, planting too shallow can expose crowns to temperature fluctuations and drying out. Follow the trench method I described earlier and you'll be fine. Overcrowding is another issue. It's tempting to pack more crowns into a space than you should because you want maximum production, but asparagus needs room to spread. Those 18-inch spacings might seem generous when you're planting small crowns, but they'll fill in over time, and adequate spacing ensures good air circulation and reduces disease risk. Similarly, failing to weed properly in the first couple years can really set back your asparagus. Young plants don't compete well with weeds, so stay on top of weeding until the bed is established. After that, the asparagus holds its own pretty well. Not harvesting properly is another common problem. Some people harvest by pulling the spears, which can damage the crown. Always snap or cut cleanly. And as I mentioned, harvesting too long into the season weakens the plants. Stick to that 6 to 8 week window and then stop, even if it feels wasteful. Neglecting to feed the bed is another mistake. Asparagus is a heavy feeder, and that annual application of compost in fall really makes a difference in productivity. Ignoring dead foliage and leaving it to rot on the bed can create habitat for pests and diseases, so clean up in fall. These are all simple things, but paying attention to them ensures your asparagus bed stays healthy and productive for decades. Now let's imagine you're convinced and ready to start your own asparagus bed. What's the actual step-by-step process from decision to harvest? First, decide on your location. You need full sun, good drainage, and a spot that won't be disturbed. Remember, this bed is going to be there for 20 plus years, so choose carefully. Avoid areas where you might want to build, expand a patio, or plant trees later on. Next, test your soil. Asparagus prefers slightly acidic to neutral pH, around 6.5 to 7. If your soil is too acidic, add lime to raise the pH. Too alkaline is less common but can be adjusted with sulfur if needed. Once your site is chosen and soil tested, order your crowns. Most garden centres carry asparagus crowns in early spring, which is planting time in most regions. You can also order online from specialty nurseries. 1-year-old crowns are cheaper, but 2-year-old crowns give you a head start. Personally, I think 1-year crowns are fine and worth the savings. When your crowns arrive, they'll look kind of ugly and dried out, like something that belongs in the compost pile rather than your garden. Don't worry, that's normal. Soak them in water for a couple hours before planting to rehydrate them. Then dig your trenches, create those little soil mounds, spread the roots out, cover with a couple inches of soil, and water well. Mark the bed clearly so you don't accidentally dig into it later, and add mulch to suppress weeds and conserve moisture. Through that first season, keep the bed weeded and watered, and resist any temptation to harvest. Watch the ferns grow, enjoy their beauty, and know that underground the crowns are building strength. In fall, after frost kills the foliage, cut it down and add compost. Year 2 is much the same. Let the plants grow, though you can take a few spears late in the season if they look vigorous. Add more compost in fall. Year 3 is when the magic happens. In early spring, watch for those first spears. When they reach 6 to 8 inches with tight tips, start harvesting. Check daily or every other day. Enjoy the incredible flavour of homegrown asparagus. After 6 to 8 weeks, stop harvesting and let the ferns grow. Continue your annual routine of composting in fall, and you're set. That's it. You've established a food-producing perennial that will reward you for years to come with minimal effort. When you think about it that way, the initial investment of time and patience is absolutely worth it. There's also something deeply satisfying about the cyclical nature of asparagus. Every spring, its return is like a promise kept. After months of winter, after maybe feeling disconnected from your garden, those asparagus spears emerging from the cold soil are a sign that life is returning, that the earth is warming, that another growing season is beginning. It becomes a ritual, a marker of time passing, something to look forward to. For many long-time gardeners, checking the asparagus bed is one of the first things they do when spring arrives. It's not just about the food, though that's wonderful. It's about the connection to place, to seasons, to the rhythms of nature that perennial plants help us attune to. I've talked to countless gardeners over the years who've told me their asparagus bed is their favourite part of their garden. Not the flashy tomatoes, not the abundant zucchini, but the reliable, undemanding asparagus that just quietly does its thing year after year. There's something comforting about that reliability in a world that often feels unpredictable and chaotic. Your asparagus bed becomes a constant, a source of both food and peace. It teaches you patience, rewards you for planning ahead, and gives back far more than you put in. For me personally, establishing my asparagus bed was one of those turning points in my gardening journey. It shifted my perspective from thinking only about the current season to thinking about my garden as an evolving ecosystem that I'm building over years and decades. If you're still on the fence, consider starting small. You don't need a massive bed to get started. Even 10 or 15 crowns will give you enough asparagus for fresh eating once the bed is established, and you'll get a sense of whether you want to expand. You can always add more beds later. The great thing about asparagus is that once you've gone through the process once, the second time is much easier because you know what to expect. Many gardeners start with one bed, fall in love with the plant, and end up creating additional beds over the years. It becomes almost addictive. That satisfaction of low-maintenance, high-yield perennial growing. For those worried about moving or not being in the same place long-term, consider this. If you're renting or planning to move within a few years, asparagus might not be your best choice. And that's okay, but if you own your home and have any intention of staying even 5 to 10 years, you'll get plenty of harvest in that time frame. And if you do eventually move, you're leaving something valuable behind. Future homeowners will thank you. I've heard stories of people buying houses specifically because they had established asparagus beds or fruit trees. Productive perennials add real value to a property. Plus, there's something generous about planting for the future, even if you're not sure you'll personally see all the benefits. You're contributing to the land itself, making it more productive and abundant. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to circle back to that original question. Why aren't more people planting asparagus? We've explored the reasons, patience requirements, space considerations, lack of knowledge, and the cultural bias toward instant results. But none of these are actually good reasons not to try. If you have the space, if you can commit to minimal effort over a couple years, if you're willing to think beyond this single growing season, there's really no downside to establishing an asparagus bed. The return on investment is incredible, both financially and in terms of food quality and quantity. The environmental benefits are significant. Perennial crops require less tilling, less replanting, less water once established, and they build soil health over time rather than depleting it. They create habitat for beneficial insects and contribute to biodiversity in your garden ecosystem. Beyond all the practical benefits, there's also joy. The joy of that first spring harvest after years of waiting. The joy of sharing fresh asparagus with friends and neighbours. The joy of knowing you've created something lasting in your garden, something that connects you to the land and to future seasons. Gardening is ultimately about more than just producing food. It's about relationship. Your relationship with plants, with soil, with seasons, with place. Perennial vegetables like asparagus deepen that relationship because they're not transient. They stay, they grow stronger, they become part of the landscape. They teach you things that annual vegetables can't, lessons about patience and faith and working with natural cycles rather than against them. So here's my challenge to you. If you've been thinking about starting an asparagus bed but haven't taken the plunge, this is your year. Do the planning now. Choose your site, order your crowns, prepare your bed, and plant this spring. Yes, you'll wait a couple years for full harvests, but time passes whether you plant asparagus or not. Wouldn't you rather spend that time knowing you're building towards something? And if asparagus isn't right for your situation, explore other perennial vegetables. Find one that fits your space, your climate, your preferences. Start small if you need to. The important thing is to begin thinking in longer time frames, to create systems in your garden that reward you not just this season, but for years to come. Gardening is fundamentally an act of hope and faith. Every seed you plant, every crown you nestle into the soil represents your belief that the future exists and that you'll be there to enjoy it. Perennial vegetables like asparagus embody this hope in the most tangible way possible. They're an investment in tomorrow, next year, a decade from now. They're a statement that you value sustainability, efficiency, and quality over convenience and instant gratification. They connect you to something bigger than yourself, to the land and the seasons and the eternal cycle of growth and renewal that defines the natural world. In our fast-paced, disposable culture, there's something profoundly countercultural and deeply satisfying about planting something once and harvesting forever. It's a quiet rebellion against the idea that everything has to be quick, easy, and immediate. It's a way of slowing down, of engaging with time at a different pace, of remembering that the best things in life often require patience and care and attention stretched out over years rather than days. So whether you're an experienced gardener looking to reduce your workload or a beginner excited about creating a more productive landscape, asparagus deserves a place in your garden. The reasons people haven't planted it yet are understandable but ultimately surmountable. The benefits far outweigh the initial investment of time and space. And once you experience that first spring harvest from your own established bed, once you taste the difference between supermarket asparagus and spears you cut yourself minutes before cooking, you'll wonder why you didn't start sooner. That's the secret that those of us with asparagus beds already know. This is one of those plants that truly delivers on its promise. It's the real deal, the plant that keeps on giving, the ultimate example of working smarter, not harder in your garden. Plant once, harvest forever isn't just a catchy phrase. It's the actual reality of growing asparagus and other perennial vegetables. And now that you know the truth, now that you understand what's possible, the only question left is, What are you waiting for? Your future self, standing in the garden 20 years from now, harvesting beautiful asparagus spears, is going to be so grateful that you took the time to plant today. Make it happen. Your perennial garden awaits.